Well, we've got a new chainsaw to play with. We had one of our saws is an old 346 we bought in '02, and we got some bad fuel and cooked a cylinder on that recently, and it was going to cost almost as much as this new one, so we just went ahead and sprung for the new one. I'm going to see if I can just put the old one back together with some aftermarket parts and use it as a spare. But anyway, I thought you might want to look at what you do when you first get one. We bought the unit with the bar, had to get it, and we bought an extra chain. We got a full chisel chain to put on it. And one of the first things you got to do, let's see if we can zoom in there before you put that together. You've got a bearing on the back side of this clutch. When the motor's running and the chain's not running, that bearing is being used. And I could see from grease here, I think they greased it at the factory. But this is a maintenance item you touch every day. Husqvarna includes, let me see, they include this little goober with it. It's a little grease pump. Back that out. It's a little grease pump. They're fine for the woods, but they're messy. You fill that with grease. There's a follower. There's a follower you put in here, and you have to push it down and push your grease down. Just messy as can be. And then it's got a little pump on the end. You can push it up against that bearing and give it a shove, and it'll give it a little shot of grease. But they're messy, and I prefer to use a grease gun. So let me see if I can zoom back in on that bearing there. There we go. Anyway, there's our clutch. And you can go to a parts store and get an adapter to go on the end of your grease gun. And put that on there and just give her a little pump. Doesn't take much. If you give it too much, you'll see grease popping out on the inside of your clutch. And that'll smoke when you're running, so you don't want to do that. Okay, so that's a daily item when you're using your saw. You should take the side plate and bar off, clean out the dirt, and grease that. So now we are ready to put the bar and chain on. So let's slip the bar on there. And when you put your chain on here, make sure it's untangled. Take your chain, and you want your teeth pointing forward on the top of the bar. So you reach it in here, make sure your hook's in your clutch. Turn your clutch, make sure that's hooked on your teeth. And you'll see, there we go. Get those teeth started in on both ends. And then you take your side plate. And Husqvarna's got a new deal, new to me anyway, because gosh, our saws are all getting pretty old. They've got the nuts that hold this on are captive, so you don't lose them out in the woods. That's a nice little addition. And let's see. Come on, get on there. Should go right on. Back this off a little bit. It's not wanting to pop in there. That's your adjustment right there. So we'll back that out a little. There we go. Now she ought to fall on. There, she falls right on now. So run those nuts up handy. Run those nuts up where they're handy, and you got your chain hanging down, and that's running right. Let's see if I got, yeah, okay, we'll get the camera set. I'm going to move this camera just a bit. And what you do now is prop up the front end of that bar. I like to use my plastic wedges for that. Put a plastic wedge there and another one, and stick it right under there where it's holding that bar up on the end. And you turn your adjustment and bring that chain up. And a lot of people have trouble figuring out where they ought to set that chain. How much slack do you want? Well, the trick is, let's put this down and zoom in there. There we go. The trick is, hold that down, and I'm going to turn the adjustment, and you bring that up till she touches. Bring that chain down. Just bring it up till that chain touches the bottom of the bar. And that is right. Sometimes after your chain's broken in, you can give it a little bit extra. Bring it up till she touches, and that is set right. Now after you run, this is the new chain. After you run a bit, it's going to get slack. It's going to get some slack because those are new rivets, new holes are going to break in, get a little slack in them. So after you run for a few minutes, you should stop and check that. And you'll also hear people say, well, how tight should you have it? You want that chain as tight as you can make it where it still turns freely. And there she just sagged a little bit. After I moved it, that sagged a little bit. So we're going to loosen those nuts again. There, set that back up. Going to re-loosen and turn those nuts back. Turn my adjustment a little more. Just bring it right up. When it touches, you're there. You don't have to be real fancy about it. When it touches, it's there. After she's broken in, you can give her a little bit extra. Remember, always pull that chain the way it's going or you'll slice the fingers. Okay, one more thing to get ready before we gas it up and oil it. This has a roller bearing in that sprocket, and you should grease that every tank of fuel, really. I don't always do that, but at minimum grease it every day, and really ought to grease it every time you fuel up. Yeah, just take that, give her a little shot. If you're feeling real generous, rotate that bearing halfway, give it another shot, and you've got that bearing greased. So anyway, that being a new saw, there's air filter's clean, spark plug's good. It just needs fuel and oil, and we're ready to go try it out. So that should be part of your daily routine. Pull your side plate off, pull the bar off. Oh, one more thing. That's a new chain, so it does not need sharpened, but let's just zoom in here on that chain a second. I like to file a chain every time I fuel up, because you use it and you're dulling those points just a little. This is full chisel, so they come to a sharp point. That part of sharpening is setting your depth gauges. Your depth gauges are, let me back this out here. There we go. Your depth gauges are just ahead of the tooth. That's a depth gauge. That controls how much wood this tooth can get. And I know from experience, this is a 325 chain, or 5/16 chain. On this size of saw with a 325 chain, if I cut those down where it takes a 35 thousandths bite, it's too much. It'll cut oak just fine, but I get into hickory and it grabs. So I like to have 30. Now you use, let me see, they make, that's a little, let me see, let me back this out. There's a little tool, you buy it in any chainsaw department. There's a little tool that shows your angles you use when you file a saw. That's the angles. And it has, these are depth gauges. That's a depth gauge, depth gauge, depth gauge, and depth gauge here. And what these are, if you read that, that says 25 thousandths. This one is 30 thousandths. That's 35, and out here on the end, that's 40 thousandths. So I'll show you how we do that. Zoom back in over here on the bar. Back out just a little. It's not, there we're focusing up. The way you do this is you set this on your tooth. I'll pull this back a tooth. Set that on a tooth over your teeth like that, and you can take the tang on your file or screwdriver or anything. You go over that depth gauge, and it doesn't touch. It's not touching that depth gauge on the tooth. So we move it up to 30. That's the 30 thousandths gauge right there. And I hold that on there and take a screwdriver and run over it. It's just tagging it. It's tagging it just a little bit, so it's sticking up, you know, a few thousandths, 1 or 2 thousandths. So I'm between 25 and 30 thousandths clearance. If I put it here on the 35, of course it catches it real good at 35. And then of course 40, I'm not even thinking about 40, but it's just shy of 30. So what you do if you want to change those, and I'm not going to change, this is a new blade, I'm going to run it before I do. They sell these files in the chainsaw department, and what's special about these files is the side of it is smooth. You don't have any cutters on the side. It has, you know, it cuts on the top, cuts on the bottom. Sides do not cut, and that keeps you from injuring a tooth. So what I like to do, of course I do this with gloves. When you're working with that blade, you put on gloves so you don't cut yourself. But I like to put my thumb right there on a tooth, and I take this file and you make a stroke across and recheck it. And when you get it where you want it, you remember how many strokes you made on that depth gauge, and you do the same number of strokes to every one all the way around. Then you turn your saw around and do the other side. And you want to, if you file so it's pushing that tooth away, and if you file the wrong way on it, it chatters. But anyway, you would take that, make a stroke all the way through, and usually, you know, 2 strokes on that would probably get it down where it's under 30, or where it's a little more than 30 thousandths. But it's real close to 30, so I'll run it there, see how that is. But don't blindly file away on those. And after you've taken it down, it's good to reshape it. You can take additional passes with an angle on there, so you keep a nice shape to it. So anyway, so I'm ready to gas that up and try out my new toy, and hope we keep good fuel this time. Yeah, I had some ethanol fuel in it, and it sat too long. It drew moisture and it separated, and poured it out later, and it was milky. So anyway, it really screwed up a good old saw, so we don't want to do that again. So anyway, we'll catch you later. We'll be making some new videos with this saw this winter.